So we're back at the Othello World Championship, and we're starting the final round for the men's final. So we will be seeing Akihiro and Yusuka pairing off on table 1. We also will have the game for third and fourth place at table 2, and the women's third and fourth place will be at table 3. You can catch the live screens on YouTube and also at Live Othello. Before we start, maybe we'll just quickly say who are the commentators here in studio and a little brief on what we could expect to see today.
Okay, so we're joined by Stefan Nicolay and Matthias Berg again. Stefan is an ex-world team champion, and he's been in the final himself twice, losing both times.
Salt in the wound.
and Matthias has obviously been a runner-up himself. Just a quick recap as to how we got to this position from the semi-finals. We are going to use a different naming convention than we've done in the previous rounds, just because Takahashi and Takanashi obviously sound very similar. So what we've decided to do is use their first names. Takanashi's first name is Yusuke, and Takahashi's first name is Akihiro. Akihiro? Is it written wrong? Okay. So we'll be using those names, and you have to remember which is which. But you can see it on the screen anyway. It's written there. Just a reminder that the clocks are the wrong way round. So
no, they've been switched.
They've been switched.
Yes, they've been corrected.
Okay. The clocks are now the right way round. So I don't need to tell you that. But in the semi-final, both players progressed relatively easy from recent years. So Takanashi beat Satani 2-0, and Takahashi beat Yan Song 2-0, and neither seemed too perturbed throughout those games. They managed to find their wins, they managed to progress, and this is a repeat of 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, Akihiro was 12 years old. He's now 14, and he felt very tired at the end of that game and lost to Yusuke in the final. And we're wondering whether his extra years might give him a little bit more stamina this year. The players kicked off, and it's a Tiger opening again.
Just a reminder, we will be monitoring the comments on Live Othello as well as on YouTube. So if you have questions for the commentators, just post them there and I will pass them along to the commentators.
So any pauses at this time are not the players being out of book. They still know the position. But as we commented on some previous videos, the Tiger has a large number of variations, and the pauses are the players choosing which variations to go down. And that will often be based on knowledge of the opponent as much as it is knowledge of the position.
Well, there's only been 11 games in Thought Database with this position, so I guess the last move was kinda unique.
Okay.
It has been played in the World Championship 3 times by Sperandio. But yeah, it's not a very standard move, I guess. So I wouldn't count on Yusuke to know how to continue or to be sure about it.
Yeah, Akihiro's book seems very strong. Broad.
And he doesn't play the standard draw tree, I think. It was already surprising, and 2 years ago he played a what do you call it, a rose bill opening, but not the main draw line, and there are many of them, so he just chose another one and was very successful.
So he's happy to vary things. That's an interesting move.
Yep, and it was only played once in championship, the French championship between Arthur and Arnaud in 2012.
So the reason it's interesting, if you can just go back one.
Can we have a look at the
on the
digital board?
yeah on
We
the
go
digital
back
board on the
on
analysis board? Is that up? Yeah. Okay. So there's a very natural move for black here, which is
F7.
yeah. It's a perfectly quiet move. It flips one disc, and that disc is completely surrounded. So it really doesn't offer much to white.
The disadvantage is that white has two quiet moves where
in
black doesn't have.
response. So white has G5 as an option, which is also a quiet move, and it's surrounded on all sides if you count the X square as a place that you don't want to play. And he also has
C7.
C7, which is quiet. Again, it's not surrounded on all sides. C5 is available, but both D6 and E7 are white, so black wouldn't be able to play there immediately. But as a result of those considerations and his preparation, Akihiro has chosen to play F8, which takes away the white. Now, if white does play C7, then black has access to C5. We've had a move on the board.
So we undo. And white created an option to go to E3. If black wanted to play E3 instead, then would eliminate the option to go to F7.
Black has indeed played E3.
Oh, okay. He doesn't care.
He's still in book. This is his
Yeah.
prepared opening.
Okay.
So in fact, we had an interesting question in the chat from the spectators, and they asked, why did black play E2 at the beginning? The answer is that it's probably an opening preparation, you know. At this level, they want to surprise the opponent, and this is just non-standard move, which is supposed to give you a time edge, because it forces the opponent to think a little bit during the opening.
So one way of looking at it, if you play a suboptimal move, you know it's not the best move, but you know that you know the position better than your opponent, the advantage can be bigger than the loss. And in this case, E2 seemed to be that move. It maybe wasn't the best move, but Akihiro had prepared it and knew what he wanted to do afterwards. So first of all, Yusuke would need to think more, use up more time on the clock, and secondly, Akihiro can be more confident in how he progresses the game.
And not only that he has to think more, he can actually make a mistake. But if he plays the optimal move, then the opponent will just know which is the good move and is not going to make a mistake unless he wants to outbook the opponent to give him the same idea to outbook him. So you need to get the opponent out of book in order to provoke a mistake, and if you don't have a mistake, then you end up with a draw or depending on your opening choice, even a loss.
Yeah, and one thing that Ben Seeley once said to me was, I think in his first, he won the World Championship twice. The first time he won it, he was very, very prepared with openings that went deep. The second time, he prepared a lot of openings, so a broad range of openings that were not so good. But he knew that he was maybe 2 discs down when he played the bad move. But then he had confidence in his ability and his opponent's lack of awareness of the position to be able to pull that back during the game. And so it's 2 different ways of looking at it.
And it's a lot of fun also.
It is also a lot of fun. If you play the same moves all the time, you become predictable. People can prepare against you even if it's your favourite and best opening.
So the comments in Live Othello reflect that we've seen a lot of very creative openings in this World Championship. Is that what
Yeah.
you would agree with?
Yes.
Somewhat?
I've never been strong on openings, so I barely know the names of them. So I'm I can't really comment on that.
But one thing is for sure that at this level they keep their opening secrets for the semi-finals. You know, and these two guys they had good chances to reach the semi-finals or the finals. And if they had real good preparations, it's now that they want to show it. So they can be creative in the finals.
They might have brought them out sooner if they needed to.
Mm.
So what's going on the board? Someone?
Yeah.
Come on.
White would like to play the quiet move now.
Do you want to show the analysis on the screen?
Okay.
But is probably considering what will black play after that, and there's he's already playing it. So I guess now black might go for g3 because he still has access to g4 afterwards, and white doesn't.
Yeah. So if you look at that, if black plays g3 now, I think he's going to play. No, if he plays g3 now, he flips f3, but he also flips f4 and e5, and there's a block of black discs at the top, and white wouldn't be able to play because of the black row 4. But all being black, white wouldn't have been able to play to g4, and then black could have taken that move as well. However, Akihiro has actually chosen to play b5. Which
defends against f2 because it flips the c5 square disc, and it is also a quiet move. You know it.
It's not poisoned down to the bottom edge.
And what? Black might play d8 soon, c8, but of course doesn't want to flip all the complete wall. So first take down the wall a little bit with some extra moves, and then play d8, c8.
Yeah, there's a good principle in there as well that black would like to play maybe c8 at some point, and if he had done so before this last move, he would have flipped 3 discs up the edge. And if you can play more moves in a given area, then often it's a good thing to do, especially in the opening. If you can play 3 moves where you could have played 1, then play the 3 moves. Because your opponent is having to play elsewhere and creating situations where they aren't able to play because they're flipping discs. Like on the right hand side of this board, white can't play over there at the moment. But we've got an edge taken, and this is edges being taken is often an interesting moment, so we're going to have a look at this.
So this edge is called unbalanced 5 because you have 5 discs on the edge, and it's unbalanced because it's leaning towards a corner. In general, they are often bad to have because the opponent can sacrifice one corner to get the edge and the other corner. But in this case, white doesn't have any moves on the east side, so at least for now, it's quite safe to take for black. And of course, it's also about tempo. Like if he didn't take the edge, then white would have taken the edge, and black would have to find 2 other moves in the same time.
And so the consideration in taking that edge is, 1, can white sacrifice down in the bottom right hand corner immediately, and would he want to? And white can't sacrifice down there at the moment because, as Matthias just pointed out, the G column is white, so if white tried to sacrifice, then black would be able to take g8 without flipping along the g column and then take the corner, save the whole edge, and have a huge mass of discs in the bottom right-hand corner. However, the other thing that black would also need to take into consideration as he's considering whether to take that bottom edge or not is whether that's always going to be true in the game. And that's a much harder call to make because it's difficult to look a lot of moves ahead. You have to start thinking in principles of what's going to happen. But if at some point, for example, black plays g4, then the sacrifice down at g7 becomes possible because that black disc will mean that black cannot play g8 without flipping the g column and taking and allowing white to get the bottom right corner. So the swindle would disappear. Black wouldn't get the extra move down there. So that's often harder to do, to judge whether it will be a problem later in the game or not. And that's often an area where the better players are better. The stronger you are is often that kind of judgment. How much is something going to affect the game later on, even if you can't yet read it?
It's often comes to a memory of shapes, preparing the end game and knowing that that kind of configuration in a corner area is almost always good for white or almost always good for black. It's really shape recognition,
Pattern recognition, yes.
yeah, pattern.
Experience and turning into intuition.
Yeah.
So we have a move.
It's worth noting that Akihiro still hasn't yet used 5 minutes.
I kinda expect Akihiro to play b6 now. It takes away the access to f2.
Do you want to show that on this analysis?
We can do that.
And he has played.
Yes.
Yeah. So black is fighting to prevent white playing f2.
White could just play a5 to get back that access, and we might see a3 to take that access away again.
Yes. Actually.
So, why is this important? Because we understood when we were watching the semi-final, the first one between Yusuke and Satani. We had a diagonal, and we knew that if black got a disc on that diagonal, he could take the corner, and we understood that taking back that diagonal was important. Why is this diagonal important? Because it's not a major one, it's not sticking into a corner.
It's basically just a quiet move. So they're really fighting for that. He could get it for sure now if he plays a6. But then it's also that we completely played out the west region.
Right, so when you say quiet, you just mean if white manages to play to f2, black doesn't have access to d2, and white's not really giving that many more options to black.
No.
And they're therefore pulling the play in the direction that he wants it to go, because white wants black to be playing on the right-hand side now. But
Yes.
black's not going to avoid it as long as possible.
And in general, one way to look at it is you want to pull the game as much as possible towards your center of disc. So you see the two discs in E2 and E3 at the top.
Mm-hmm.
White would definitely want to get two moves out of this.
And like we said earlier, if you
Yeah.
can have two moves instead of one, make sure you take the two.
So first you try to play f2 and then e2. Now it's no longer possible, but there was a fight for this idea during a couple of moves.
Now, I'm not convinced that later in the game, black isn't going to play g7. Not yet.
Yeah.
But
I think white
taking-
might play b2 before that
Oh,
happens.
that's what I'm saying. Later in, well, okay, yes, quite possibly, but I mean the threat of black playing g7, when you have the two edges on adjacent sides, you can often get a lot of discs that stop your opponent from coming outwards, and that allows you to take squares and, in this case, g7 maybe not get cut. So it's almost a sacrifice against your own corner, but white can't get the corner.
So
Against your own
let's try the analysis board. I think they might be considering to play b3, and if white would go like d2, then black could actually play the g7 that you suggested, and it would be impossible or very hard to cut through the diagonal. I mean,
Well, it's easy to cut, but the only way in which you can do it is to give the bottom left corner,
yes.
Yeah.
which is a
But-
big sacrifice.
And then you also want to take this, and then the cut will be gone away, and you already have lots of this that are stable. So, but I think that's why white actually might consider playing b2 at that point.
Right. But as we said in one of the previous games, the threat of something happening is often a reason to play a move. So b2 would be played to stop black from playing g7.
Actually, we had a French world champion in 1984 called Paul Rall.
Oh, yeah.
Paul Rall. And he won the world championship with that idea. It's against Mr. Taniguchi. And he took two age of 5 like this, and in the end,
You can't say like this and point at the screen, so you have to describe it.
yes.
So what Stefan was saying there was Paul Rall, who's a French player in the 90s,
Yes.
80s and
80s.
90s, won the world championship, and this was at a time when the Japanese really did dominate, probably even more than now, or the best Japanese player. It was very rare for a non-Japanese player to win the world championship, and Paul Rall managed it, and he actually had this idea where he had two edges, in this case similar to the left hand one and the bottom one for black, and he did play the g7 type move, the x square next to his own edge.
It was his tempo to kill the position.
Right.
The f6 square disc is in fact very important because it gives black this possibility.
What's your intuitive assessment of this position, or in terms of who do you think's got the advantage?
This is hard to say. I mean, there's an odd region, but white can play into it, and especially if a2 is played by black, white wants to play b7 at some point because no problem to sacrifice that region. It's black's turn, and there are not many interesting options. c2 might be an option, and then white might actually go for parity
C1.
by playing after c1 b2
Right.
to get the diagonal, and then later play b1 as soon as black had cut the diagonal, and then it's a parity in that region, and whenever white is in danger, it can just play b7 to have another tempo move or for the parity. So I think might be better for white.
Okay, so you think white, Stefan?
I try to read the body language of the players, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, this was the reason I was asking the question. Normally, by this point in the game, Yusuke has often sat back and had a good think about the position, and he's playing relatively quickly. So
There's actually some debate right now in Live Othello about whether the players are playing too quickly right now, and what you think about that, if that's a strategy of forcing the other to be out of book, or...
there is no book here. And yes, sure, if you want to go down that route, you can play quickly, and you can kind of draw your opponent into playing quickly, but it's not a strategy that world champions use. They want to play the best move that they can find, and they assume that their opponent will play the best move that they can find.
And there's 40 minutes, so that's much more than the average game we play.
So and like they've still got 26 and 29. So in this case, there's absolutely no reason to rush whatsoever. There's no, as I said, in the round in the Swiss game between these two, Akihiro did actually play a move that deliberately made Yusuke think about the position. But the reason he did that was because Yusuke was already short on time. So it happened to be Akihiro's best move anyway. But at the point, Yusuke was actually about 10 discs up and moving into very much endgame territory. So it worked.
But it's also depending on the position. Like, this is not very open. There's very limited choices for white. Black has to play a move through, and white will get another move because of that. But in other positions, you play one move, and there's like 5 or 6 moves for the opponent.
Yeah.
And there you have to think a lot. But here, it's you can go very deep very quickly.
Dismiss many of the options very quickly, and then play what's left.
I certainly agree with that. That the position is fixed in a high level sense. The plans are known. Black is taking edges and trying to kill with that, and white is on the defense. And you know, it's quite easy to play fast when you are in a defense, because there is only one possible move at each turn, in a sense. White has a very limited number of options, so he can afford, in a sense, to play fast.
Right. And so, generally speaking, in this position, because black has taken edges, white is short of moves. White could be forced to do something very bad by completely running out of good options. However, because black has taken edges, lots of moves are poisoned, and if white gets black to start playing through the right hand edge, all of the white pieces on the right hand side, then black will be turning a lot of discs very quickly and giving white a lot of options at that point. So this is something that often happens in games, where one player thinks that they can force the other player into a shortage of moves, give them no options, but the other person just manages to hang on. And then when you manage to hang on and you get them to play through, it can then turn very quickly. If black plays through on the right hand side, then this could turn into white's advantage, even though white's the one who's struggling right now.
And we have another question from YouTube, and it's for Matthias. And the question is whether you'd prefer in this position to be white or black, and why?
Well, a few minutes ago I said I would prefer white, and I think I'm still with the same assessment, because I was just trying to find a good move for Akihiro, and I don't really find something very convincing, because white still has G7 coming anytime he wants.
Do you mean B7?
B7, yes. There was something interesting. I wonder if the black column, the black diagonal from B3 to G1 might be a problem for white later. Like,
diagonal from-
Black might sacrifice h8, or white might sacrifice it and doesn't get access to the wedge at g8. And also the other diagonal from a7 to f3 is black now, so if white would play d1 now and followed by c1, b1, then black can actually play g7 and there's no easy cut.
Right. So
Should we have a look at that?
If we look at it on the analysis board. So in this position, that G7 move that we've been talking about previously comes into play, and there's an added feature that the diagonal from E3 down to B6 is all black. Therefore, white doesn't have a nice move up to F2, nor can he play down to A7 and cut that major diagonal.
But this is still a valid move, and then it's black's turn to, and black doesn't have. Black has one more, but then it gets cut, and then it's game over, I would say. So. So what alternatives are there for white? White can of course play the b7 anytime, I said, if there's any reason to, like if there's no other good moves. Then we have the d1, which might turn out good, but there's also a different version like this, where white might have b7 is always there for rescue, or I don't know if this is a valid option.
Right, so D1 for white now actually gives black options, and where there's options there's always the potential that you've missed something because you're having to look a long way down a good number of lines.
Just to interrupt for a second, it looks like the third and fourth place women's game has been completed, so I don't know if you just wanted to, so we aren't able to show it on the screen, but you can check Live Othello to see the final position if we have some comments on that game.
Well, so the result is that Lee won with 42-20 against Velma Fu. So the third place goes to Korea. Stefan is browsing quickly through the game. And there was a nice swindle in the end, and that's a huge black win.
Yeah, I think black took an advantage in quite early in the game and keep it to home. Okay.
Yeah, so there are limited options, but there are at least 2 or 3 options for Yusuke, and now is a good time to spend the time to consider how it goes, because this is actually the very important part of the game right now. The end game might be complex or might be very easy depending on how the next few moves go.
So C1 is an option, in fact, because you could play C1, D1, and then B2, and hope for parity till the end.
I'm just looking at the comments from the ex-world champion Ben Seeley as well, and he's saying he was agreeing with you, Mathias, saying he can't really see anything nice for white, and black looks like, using someone else's words, is going to destroy his own position in a minute. But then Ben also points out that Akihiro has got a bit of a reputation for making the best of end games without there being conventional play. Like those intuitive things that we learn about good positions, he tends to find the best moves even when it's not in those situations. So Do you agree with that?
Yes. For instance, in the first game of the semi-final, I was very impressed because I think that Aki managed to win with black, and it was not so easy. It didn't have the parity in the first game of the semi-final, and I was, yeah.
So he didn't get parity. He wasn't way ahead on the board, and often white drifts into the win and just plays parity at the end. In those circumstances, but he managed to find a way to get discs and make them stable.
And this is a real mastery, to win with black when you have no parity. So back to the game. What could white
D1
do?
or C1 or the B7? I don't really see anything else. Like F2 would just be followed by G. Okay, parity wise it could work, like F2, G1 and then B2. And then you just play for that parity region.
Maybe it would be a good time to have a look at the other game.
Yeah.
Of the.
Sikir's gone into his traditional 20-minute analysis. So if we have a look at the third-fourth playoff. Okay.
And in the playoff we see black having opposite edges, which is usually considered inferior because all the moves you will play on the sides will be influenced by the top and the bottom. That means you will always flip many discs and giving your opponent many options.
And just to say that it's Tetsu Satani who is black in this game and Yan Song who is white.
But white opened the west side and apparently doesn't want to play on the east side, even though the east is the one with the odd number of empty squares. So that might lead to parity reach, that black actually is in parity right now. Because there's no way for white. Okay.
Right, so what you're saying is black is making all the even regions on the right hand side of the board and white has no easy way to play on the left hand side of the board without giving away swindles.
Yeah, in a sense.
The B column is completely white, so white cannot play B2 or B7 because black will just play on the edge, not take the corner, and then take the corner as well.
For this reason, in fact, maybe black has parity.
Yeah, which is matches is.
But there might also be some diagonal control coming up for white, which might force black to open the west.
So you're talking top right to bottom left diagonal.
Yes.
Yeah. And the other thing that white can do in this position is get a wedge on the right-hand side of either the top or the bottom edges. So, for example, if he somehow manages to sacrifice the bottom right corner and then takes G8, then he can make the sacrifice at B7 and be guaranteed that he won't get swindled there. So that's the other option for white. We'll go back to the board because there's been a couple of moves played. Okay, so white has played B7, making the sacrifice that Matches has been pointing out is always available. And then black Akihiro has played d1.
Before. Oh no.
D1.
No, okay, no.
So there's quite a lot going on in this position at the moment.
Yeah.
Hence the silence of the experts.
Now, the question is, will black continue his edge grabbing strategy
It's G1.
with G1? That's 3 edges. Normally it's fatal, but in this position, white is very short of tempi.
So after G1, white kinda is forced to play B1, I think.
Yeah.
And then black can play G2. Interestingly, right? Because it doesn't flip F3. And then I would say this could be trouble for
B2.
white.
So we are talking about a sequence like G1 for black.
Do you want to show
To
it on the
show on the board?
analysis?
We could.
Yeah, great.
And then B1 for white and G2 for black. Not flipping F3.
If Mirek was here, he would say, don't try this at home.
And then white would play here, giving up that. So then black has the west edge and the bottom edge for sure.
Because he can play the associated corners and save them.
Yes.
So
But it still just comes down to parity at this point, maybe.
oh, you can kill. You can try to kill as we did
This.
and play E1. You sacrifice a
And then here.
no here.
Oh, okay. Yes. Right.
Yeah.
This.
And
This and this.
this.
Okay.
We've gotten quite far ahead.
Well, I'm quite sure they are thinking like that as well.
And this is demonstrating something that was readable.
Because it's kind of forced. If black takes G1, then white has
Doesn't- yeah.
4 legal moves, and 3 of them are bad. Yeah, very bad.
So we've said this before. When your opponent doesn't have many moves, you can look deep.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is one of the sequence they are considering. Do we go back? So now he has 22 minutes to find the win.
Yeah. So what other options does he have? Looks like all the other moves are opening the east too much, so that white is likely just to get parity out of this.
Well, that's a problem when you take edges too early in the game, you know. If it works, and if not, you have to open.
It's often very the games are close, but the result is very big. Like either the game collapses for white, the one that is not edge creeping, then he has to give up the corners and you have a big win maybe, or you start having to open up the one side and you lose big time on parity, or just the fact that you have all the edges, and if you give up one corner, then the next corner falls.
Yeah, so it's not always true. If you look at the end position and one person's got a heavy score, it's not always true that it was actually an easy win. It could have been a very hard fight between one player trying to run the other one out of moves, getting exceptionally close to doing it, failing and then the position collapsing.
And there he plays another move that we didn't expect. So, did you see that one?
So black tried this one.
Yeah. I was thinking about it shortly, but I thought, okay, no, white can just take it and...
White can't not take it. What was the purpose of that?
So what is the purpose of that? Maybe it will come to the G2 now.
Yeah, G2 is a really interesting move because if black plays G2, white takes H1, black plays G1.
Do you want to show this on the analysis?
Why not?
And
Okay, he's done it. He's done it.
Okay.
Oh wow, this is cool. I like this. But the point is, if white takes H1 and black takes G2, then black has created even regions at the top, and on the left, white still hasn't got any extra moves on the right-hand side of the board because E1 and F1 are both black, so he just can't come out diagonally, as is on the analysis board.
And here white is probably going to play... wait, white might just go for this instead.
Yeah.
Or maybe white should just play here, and there will be the last move for black to play probably as the last move, and then would continue on the east side.
So Akihiro is kind of willing to give up edges and corners to maintain control and to get parity at the end of the game, and that looks like it could be very strong.
Okay. This is if white takes the corner, and what if?
Then he will just take.
Yeah.
Then he can just take this.
Oh. Oh.
So of course this is also an option, but this is similar. Of course this doesn't work because he doesn't have access here. Okay. Oops.
We don't need to go to the board, but the position that we were looking at in the other game, the third-fourth playoff, hasn't changed since we saw it before. So it's still the position with black making even regions on the right and white not being able to play safely on the left. We'll keep you up to date with what happens there as well.
Okay. So Ben was saying maybe white will play C1.
C1, and with the idea of
Can we
playing
have the analysis up?
Yes.
playing C1 with the idea of playing G1 and H1 in whichever.
Oh, so forcing black to play B1 immediately.
Yeah, and then you can play this, and then
But then I think black still just needs to cut the diagonal in order to get the spindle.
well, oh, okay.
For example.
But like, can black not play?
He did it, and in fact, it opens another defense in G3. So
So is there any chance? Oh yeah, so he doesn't even need to play. Can black play something else but B1?
of course it does, but then it's
Then it's a swindle, right?
Yeah, it's a swindle. It's 7 points. In fact, it's not very different from the other kind of sacrifices we were considering. White has given, black has given maybe 10 stable discs, and he wants to keep B1 for parity.
So right now I feel like the B2 by Akihiro was not very good, but well, let's see how it plays out for him. I kind of like the other option to just play G1 and G2 later.
So playing things out in this direction, if Yusuke had played out the top right corner first, he wouldn't have had that move. So playing things out in this order meant that he had an extra move over there.
Okay, so now black needs to get parity. Maybe black will just play H2, but then needs to get parity somewhere out of this. He doesn't want to play G2 and G1 and followed by H1.
I don't know the computer evaluation of the position, but it may be that Akihiro outsmarted himself with playing G2 in fact.
How about this?
Yeah.
Can we have the analysis up?
Okay, the C1 to H6 column is, diagonal is white, so this might be a good move. If white would attack that corner, then black could just take away that access for that.
By that you mean?
To the wedge in G8. And there's also an odd region which might lead to parity somehow.
I feel like everyone is having such fun with this game because these are very unusual and creative situations.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Akihiro is, he doesn't shy away from playing scary things if he thinks they're right. Sometimes, especially in pressure games, you can look at something, you can think, I think this is the right move, and it's really exciting, but I could be wrong, and I don't want to play it if it's wrong. And so you shy away from playing it. Some players don't mind getting it wrong as much. And therefore that sometimes they play the more brilliant moves.
White.
Oh, white can play there, yeah. So white could play...
Analysis again?
White could play H2 at any time because it would just keep the top edge for black. Yes, so after black move there, white could just play there, and even if black gets to the diagonal, white will get G1 after H1 and keeping lots of this in that region, and white just needs parity in the end and some edges like
and he's guaranteed some edges if that's the case.
So he did play that move. So white could go for H2 now, or
it's actually quite an interesting point. You know, beginners they tend to take corners. They are right to take corners like 99% of the times. But in this position, if you take the corner with white, you just create a very ugly square in G1 where you cannot play, and black will keep this and keep
or take it and give nothing in return.
Yeah. And so it's quite interesting that the only possible option for white in this region at the moment is not taking the corner, but giving it back once more. And you can create a pair like this, and whatever black play in that pair, you get the other one. And this is much better than taking the corner. So, having said that, why is he thinking he should play H2?
So
Well, he has 10 minutes left, and
not having looked it through, but I'm wondering if there's an extra. Oh well, no. Okay, so we think White's kind of coming out slightly more strongly in this position anyway, so
Yeah.
he wouldn't need to consider. There's not anything desperate, such as playing out the bottom right-hand corner without Black having access to G7. So a sacrifice and a wedge one way or the other, and then Black not having access to G7. But he doesn't really need to do that. So
the disadvantage of White playing H7 now is that
Okay.
Black might not take H8. That leaves an odd region there, and
Sorry?
if White plays H7, Black may maybe not take that, or is likely to not take it, and that would leave an odd region there,
Mm-hmm.
and
Okay.
a region where White doesn't want to play in.
sure. So it gives chances to Black. Whereas H2 forces things a bit more
Yes.
and guarantees some benefit at the end.
And especially now,
We'll get the analysis again.
if White plays there, then there's two regions with even numbers, and White just needs to be careful to not clean the diagonal again after it's been cut. Like,
Yes,
This is not going to be good,
and the reason that's not good, just to go to the
Because-
next two moves,
because there's a swindle coming,
right?
and this is deadly.
So the swindle being where Black takes the corner, doesn't flip along the diagonal because it's all white. And obviously we'd expect neither of these two players to make that as a mistake. It could happen if it's forced in through some strategy.
So he didn't play H2, he
He
played
played H7.
H7.
So I don't think Black will take this one, because then White just can play G8 and G7 and getting lots of stable discs there. So Black might play H2 himself.
I don't know your opinion about this, but as a player, I always find it very difficult when there is one big region to fill in the end.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
complicated. You can play.
Yeah.
You open up one. You play one move, and then there's two or three other good moves for the opponent you create. And even if nothing else, all the other squares would be filled. Counting these 4 or 5 empties can be already too complex to find the best move.
Right, and so often after the game, when people look at the game on a computer, with the analysis turned on, the computer at this point can just look to the end of the game and count the scores in every single line and say this is the best one and this is how much you would win by if you play this, and your opponent still plays perfectly. However, it's also the point in the game where even the world's best players can easily make a mistake, because a computer can read every single line, a human can't, and has to make judgment calls. And when there's lots of options, it's still difficult to make the right judgment calls.
And strangely enough, when the combinatorics is complicated, we sort of better understand what's going on. If I mean, my point is, if there are empty squares in the four corners, then you can make plans. If there's only one big region, then it's not planning but calculating very precisely the sequences, and it becomes more difficult for me. In fact.
Yeah, if there's only 4 in the corner, then you play into one. The opponent only has one more option. If he plays there, you play the other one next move. So it's quite forced there. But here, the opponent can play pretty much anything.
Yeah.
There's some further discussion on Live Othello right now about Akihiro's endgame. I wonder if you want to revisit your thoughts on that?
I will pass on this one because I don't know his playing style very much.
Well, Ben is asking the question. He wonders whether Akihiro has done more endgame training than anybody else on the planet, as he put it. And something that you might like to know is that there is a program called Pisuke, which is Android.
It says it works on Android here.
Yes.
Okay. And possibly iPhone as well. I don't know, but it's a phone app which is endgame puzzles, and they're set at different levels, and it really is good practice because the more endgames you play, you actually learn some generic things that can be applied to other endgames. So you might want to go and check that out. Akihiro has chosen to play h5 here, pulling out some internal discs, refusing to take the h8 corner immediately as Matthias suggested he would, and other stuff.
I think White shouldn't play. Well, I'm not sure of any. If White wants to open up the G7 option again by playing H4.
What happens after h4 if Black plays a7?
What? What can? So let's see the analysis.
Okay. I mean, it's a quick thought, and I really haven't thought it through. And White will probably play down in the bottom right-hand corner, not take the corner.
So it's White's turn now.
Yeah. So if h4, then I'm convinced it's not going to work. But what I'm trying to do is take away. I'm looking at the possibility of taking away White's access to g4 by playing a7. But my superficial assessment just caught where White will take the other corner down in the bottom left, but he probably wouldn't. But it's an interesting thing because if he did, Black can then sacrifice the bottom right.
So you're
Right. So yeah. So and that's kind of a nice way to
and then you have
save stuff.
this, and then you
sure.
just
But
yeah. And you just take all the discs.
well, what about?
Oh no, then you need to still
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still got the diagonal if
No,
Black plays.
the problem is you need to make sure to not cut the diagonal again. And that's the problem, like this.
No. Come on.
Yes.
No, no.
This is a win.
Mhm.
This is a black win.
No. Why should the black win?
Yeah,
Why is this a black win? No, the other one is the black win because if White plays there, then you have you
That's
don't get
still
many
White.
of these. Okay, but you get this win, but you don't get the discs.
Right.
So
I just want to point out for game 2 that Yan Sung is very low on time, has only about 45 seconds left to play the remaining moves, so that might be interesting to just have a quick look at game 2 for a second.
And Yan Song is White.
yes.
When you change games like this, in chess, in chess it is very easy. You count material and you know who is winning. In Othello, you have to think for a couple of seconds.
So just jumping into a board position can be very difficult because you don't have the gut instinct of why certain moves have been played, and what strategic significance there is for different elements of the position. When you've watched a game from the beginning, you can see what the players are thinking and therefore sometimes assess where the game is going.
So I would say that probably black is winning because he already has the north edge and he will get
the south
and the east. That's already about 20 discs, and it's quite easy to get 10 more in the center and win.
Also, he will get the diagonal. Most of the one of the diagonals at least.
It looks black.
If black takes the corner right now, and white goes in the C square and the
saves the whole bottom edge.
No, white takes H8. No, black takes H8, G8, and then black will play A7, and then has hyper parity, meaning black will not be able to play into that region first.
Yeah. So he will save the bottom edge. Back on the main board, please. We've had a move there.
So.
Was it a defense against your idea of playing A7?
Maybe. I mean, my idea may or may not have been good immediately. It may have had potential later in the game, and it may be total rubbish. But it was just something that I happened to be looking at. But this would prevent it immediately anyway. It also keeps... no. I'm not sure I totally understand that move.
No. I'm still trying to figure it out as well. We see there's 4 minutes for Yusuke and 10 minutes for Akihiro.
Interestingly, Ben Seeley, believe before that move, said maybe A7. So
A7 is what we said was H2. That's the idea we had all the way.
Yeah, no, but Ben said maybe A7, and A7 was played. Oh, sorry. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's the board flip. Wrong A7.
So A7 is actually the H2 that we were saying.
I was hoping that Ben was saying, how about the move that we've just seen? Because then we could ask Ben why he was considering it.
So the second game, if we can pull up the other screen again, has finished. If you want to have a look at that.
And it's Tetsu Satani won against Sung Yan, and gets the third.
And the final position looks like they played out what we suggested as well, with black taking the bottom corner, white taking the wedge, and then black getting the hyper parity in the bottom left.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, black has 3 edges plus some disc in the middle, which is very often enough for a win.
Yeah, it's quite handy if you haven't got time to count at the end of the game, to know that there are 28 edge pieces, because if one player is taking edges towards the end of the game, you can assess how close they are to the 32 that's required for a draw, without actually counting. Most good players are counting by the end of the game, and they're actually seeing how many discs are going to be black and how many are going to be white at the end of the game before they reach there. But if you haven't got time, you need to have techniques for guessing, and knowing that there's 28 edge pieces is very handy, because that's just about a draw or a win if you get a few internal discs as well.
That's interesting. We could do it in the main game of the final. Who would get the north edge?
So we'll go back to the main game?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So black will get south, and white will get the west. This balance out. What about the two others?
Well, our expectation is that white will manage to get the north
By playing h2.
by playing h2 at some point,
Okay.
and just parity, unless there's a swindle.
And black will probably get, well, will definitely get the bottom edge, and probably get the majority of the right edge as well, because he can just take h8 at some point.
Yeah,
But-
but white will also get the second, the seventh row. So for
Yes.
giving up the 8th row, at least get a lot of disc in the 7th row.
Yeah, which is the advantage of parity.
Yes. And depending on when that move happens, the G7 could be G8 could be very strong, because it takes B3 and C4, which are the main points to actually get some stable disc for black.
Right. Okay. So yes, absolutely. Good point. So Matches's comment there was that if G8 is played by white,
Do you want to show it on the board?
okay, go.
Yep.
So yeah, if G8 now is played by white, ignore the fact that there's a swindle there, because that won't be there, but keep it on the analysis board. He has flipped B3 and C4, and that means that those two discs were able to pull out a lot of white discs and make them black by playing over at H3 and G4, or maybe eventually H4. It's a very strong move, because it prevents black from playing big moves later. We've had another move on the board, so we're going to go back.
I wonder if this is now a valid move for white, for pretty much similar reasons.
Right, so here we see that black has actually played the H2 move that we have been suggesting for white, and it's often the case that your opponent's best move is your best move, just because it prevents them from playing their best move. And in this case, this is almost certainly the reason that he's done it. He doesn't want white to play that move, so he has.
Because now parity could work for him, maybe.
Well, yeah.
The problem
Can't
is
see
that
how.
the problem is that black might be forced to play B8 at some point.
B8.
A8 takes the corner, and then doesn't have the parity anymore.
Yeah.
So natural move is of course white playing in G4.
G4.
That would flip.
Do you want to show that on the screen?
Yes, that would flip
G4,
G3.
not H4.
Oh, okay.
The idea of if black goes to H8, then you force a parity position.
For, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, he's actually playing the move here.
Even though black has already cut himself off from those big moves out anyway, so not necessarily for the reason that you said.
Okay.
Ooh, there's another diagonal coming into play here. If black doesn't take A8,
Yeah, will not. Yes.
it's easily cuttable. Or is it?
Yes.
So, if black takes H8 now, then the question is, can white do something with that diagonal?
Well, maybe
Does he need to?
No, he can play this one. Then it's parity.
Mm. So it seems as though it's playing out for white. Is there anything that black has hope in?
Well, black could just take this now, and then get the second. Like white can play here, and then it's lots of discs for black. Or if white doesn't play there, then black has this move to get lots of discs in it.
But neither of those look enough anyway.
Oh, yeah, maybe not. May also depend on how big the last move to G1 will be. And there's only 1 minute left for this guy.
Again.
He's very fond of using all his time, I believe.
I wonder what he would do with 2 hours.
He would use it.
Yeah, unfortunately. So, as I said, he doesn't want to play that.
That being
Taking the G7. You can play G7 later. But I guess he will be forced to take G7 right, like real soon. Probably after the next move.
They are counting. Human computers, calculating till the end.
Yeah. I guess A7, A8 is better, yes. Now G7 was forced. And yeah, it looks like it's a nice G1 in the end. This is enough.
This is also.
Who wins this? Okay, we will see.
Yeah,
in the
it's
second.
very close. Yep.
So it's -4. So Yuska wins with 34.
talking about messy discs.
Yeah.
So it's 34 for Yuska.
For white.
For white, very close game.
Very close game.
And it's important how close the game is, because now assuming, just for the moment, that Akihiro wins the second game, then discount will be the way in which the colours for the final game are chosen. The person with more discs will be choosing which colour they want to be going into the final game.
And they win with a draw.
And they also win with the draw. So the fact that this is close could be significant, but we'll see how the second game pans out after a short break.
And speaking of the second game, it's about 10 minutes from now. It will be the second game for the final, and also the ladies' final will be on table 2. So we will see you in about 10 minutes.